All right, and with that, we are just about over the halfway point for the first day of the Europe preliminary for spring. We are going to keep going up into the uppers bracket. We do have a really exciting match coming up next. We're going to send it right over to the desk where the boys are waiting to jump into the action.
Thanks for that, TJ. And I'm joined by Rob and Frodan on the desk there. So
you get emotional over that.
No, I was so happy for Crane. Just decided to tear up a little bit.
Sure, sure. Dan is too.
I'm not crying at all. I'm actually not even surprised because I expected this.
Well, you did draft it, so I have to believe you on that.
Yeah, and I'm still on the board
just
as
like
well.
You expected to go 0-2 as well.
Yeah, we're all living up to our predictions.
It's okay.
Me and Frodan are still doing okay, but
yeah, Raven, you're doing well too.
Yeah,
well,
looking okay.
I got a bow tie.
Nice. But
we'll
we do have the next game coming up, which is going to be Georgec versus Loyan. So that's going to be a really interesting one. As we see Loyan, known for the Shaman, that really took the ladder by storm, I think, and everyone sort of jumped on that bandwagon, decided to see what that deck can do.
Yeah, it's a good day to be a complexity player. We've seen Loyan and Crane both having like really good results here. I was talking to Sottle also on complexity about both of those players, and he says he's not really surprised by the results. So.
I mean, you shouldn't be when you practice with some of these guys. Loyan's a player that's been catching more attention recently. Like you said, he hit #1 legend with that Bloodlust Shaman. It's really kind of put it on the map because people weren't really thinking about Bloodlust as a legitimate card. People always mock it to the much more sexier and much more appealing younger version called the Savage Roar. People always like, well, I'd rather just play Savage Roar than a Bloodlust. Except Bloodlust with these days with Shaman, where you're playing Tuskar Totemic, you're playing Feral Spirits, you still have a lot of ability to flood the board. And there's even like cards like Primal Fusion coming into play here. There's a lot of good Shaman tools out there to make sure you secure your board, and why not just make sure you have a finisher? There are some additional small little cards that give them different advantages in different matches, but we'll talk more about that in the series.
Yeah, and the other player is Georgec, who's actually, I believe, probably one of the youngest players who have qualified so far to this event, and I think he's in around 15, I'm going to guess. I think it's roughly that age, and he's a very accomplished player as well. He's consistent top ladder finishes, and he's one of these players who just gets very high up on the ladder very quickly and then just sits there and is like, I'm okay at like top 20 or whatever, top 50, and I'll just wait until I get pushed out of that to then play again. So really impressive to play at that level at that young age.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of comparisons to Amnesiac, both in play skill as well as personality. A little bit boisterous, kind of like a little rowdy as a youngster, if you will. Cheeky, if you want to borrow a term across the pond. But yeah, like he's definitely a player who's very opinionated, very confident, and very good at Hearthstone. And most of the players, they sometimes they have him spectate matches, and he's always like giving them advice on their play, and they're usually begrudgingly agreeing that he's correct, even though they didn't get to see it. And I think that's ultimately his strongest suit. That he's seems at least on the technical side he's very strong. The question becomes, how good is his preparation? Is his lineup good? Because he is bringing a very interesting mix of Freeze Mage, Zoo, and Aggro Shaman. It's not exactly the most traditional lineups that we've been seeing today.
Yeah, I actually really like what he's brought. It's definitely different from what we've been seeing, especially for that Tempo Warrior build. He's actually not running Archthief for Fom or Varian Rin, so what he does have is Leroy Jenkins, though.
Yeah.
So Leroy Jenkins and Tempo Warrior definitely gives him a little bit of extra burst. He tops out at Ragnaros. I like the fact in Zoo he's also got Leroy there. He's got Aggro Shaman, and Freeze Mage is kind of just out there on an island as that lone control deck for Georgec.
Yeah, it's a cool dynamic to make sure that your opponent can't just target a single archetype, because if you were to look at George's decks outside of Freeze Mage, they are some of the more aggressive decks in the metagame. They actually plan to end the game within a reasonable time frame,
Which is great.
Yeah, other like control decks like N'Zoth Control Warrior, Control Rhinolock, or Control Priest, Control Paladin, they take a while, but they'll ultimately kind of like the same exact thing. George has a very wide spectrum of decks, ranging from like the aggressive to mid-range to the combo control decks.
Yeah, I like the fact that we saw that Loyan had banned out Georgec's Freeze Mage, and Georgec had actually banned out Loyan's Warrior, which is that Control Warrior. So Freeze Mage obviously wants to get rid of Control Warrior, generates a lot of armor. Maybe not necessarily as huge of a concern against Tempo Warrior, but it's just one of those things where no Freeze Mage and no Freeze Mage counter on the board.
Yeah, also interesting as well because Georgec is actually known probably most for his Freeze Mage, so it's like a double whammy ban there. It's like the Freeze Mage works as a ban for Loyan because he's presuming the Warrior will get banned because it's Freeze Mage, but also it's the deck that Georgec probably plays the most, so has that one moment where you can actually ban the specialization and the one that's relevant for the lineup. But it looks like the game's going to start, so I'm going to leave you guys to it. Enjoy.
Alone at last, Dan. Alone at last.
Hooray!
So game 1 here going to be Zoo versus Aggro Shaman. And this is one of those really, I think, polarizing matchups in the current meta where I think Aggro Shaman just gets chased off the board by Zoo, and Aggro Shaman gets in this position where they're straight up fighting from behind.
So you still feel like Zoo has that edge over the Shaman?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the best reasons to bring it is the prevalence of Aggro Shaman, although we have been seeing a lot more mid-range lately.
It's a really spot-on statement there, I think, Rob. Zoo is a deck that flies under the radar. People assume it's a very cheap budget deck that you can kind of build, and so you see it as a prominent on ladder. But people don't really give its respect because, you know, it's kind of lost a step. It isn't maybe not as explosive athletically before with Haunted Creepers and Nerubian Eggs. Maybe doesn't have as much bounce as it used to, but you do see that Zoo still has a lot of possibility of accelerating onto the board and snowballing. On turns 1 to 4, they still can become very threatening. Possessed Villager is like a mini Haunted Creeper, and it does help give a lot of board durability. Like, things can keep trading and keep trading. And as long as Zoo has cards like that, then it'll still be a constant threat to win the game.
Right, its agenda has pretty much remained unchanged even with the introduction of Whispers of the Old Gods in the standard format. It still just wants to put minions on the board. It's very consistent, has that low curve, and I agree. I do believe, you know, you're looking at kind of the older, less sexy version of Zoo as it's lost in Nerubian Egg and some of the other tools like Haunted Creeper, but, you know, it still does its job. Lower overall power level, but I think in general the field has a lower power level overall.
Yeah, so don't underestimate Zoo. I think it's one of the sleeper decks to perform well in the tournament, just until people really understand how to outfit it. Now, George does have a few interesting techs, like you mentioned. He has Leroy Jenkins as a potential finisher. I know a lot of people have been outfitting their decks in multiple ways. Some like the shiny rims of a Sea Giant. Some really like a nice stereo system of a Doomguard, but this guy really likes to go fast and likes to go hard. He's got that Leroy Jenkins as a finisher with Power of Overwhelmings. Those are things that you don't necessarily know what to expect on ladder, but in this environment, you know exactly what to play around, and that's a huge deal for a guy like Loyan, who's extremely calculating for how he plays the game.
Right, I was going to say, George C. opting for that Too Fast, Too Furious Leroy Jenkins Power Overwhelming finisher.
I like that you're keeping up with my analogies,
no, this
Rob.
is
You're feeding off me. This is great synergy right now.
I prepped Dan. I looked. I was like, I'm casting with Dan. I gotta be ready. So yeah, but he does have pretty solid curve here. Loyan does have that Flame Juggler. Is going to be the face juggler actually. So that Possessed Villager gets to live another turn.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big deal because having that one extra token gives you better synergy off Direwolf Alpha. It gives you a legitimate thing for Dark Iron Dwarf to trade off of. So don't underestimate it. And now George C. even has an additional Power of Overwhelming, meaning trades are even that much more effective. Missing that juggle does mean that Loyan's going to have to fight uphill that much more. It might not seem that big of a difference, but I mean, already there's 5 power on board, and anything you play just gets kind of obliterated.
Yeah, the early turns really tell the story of this matchup, and we see, you know, George C. has already secured the board, and Aggro Shaman not traditionally something running like Lightning Storm. You're not going to see any kind of like wild Pyromancer shenanigans, no elemental destructions, and once Zoo gets on the board, it's just kind of, the Shaman can't really chase him off, and in a lot of situations, it seems like the Shaman lost on like turn 1 or 2, but just keeps playing anyway.
There's a very like subtle thing about George's positioning as well. If he went up against a Feral Spirit the previous turn, he actually had his minions positioned where he would have to trade away the 1/1 before he gets to the 2 attack minion on the Abusive Sergeant. But then again, based off the way he lined it up, he can also respond to different threats if, you know, another juggler came, for example. So it's interesting to see how these players are positioning based off what they think is a likelier play.
Right, and that kind of factors into the age-old argument between the people who think Zoo is a no-skill deck versus the players at the highest level who know that there are a lot of subtle nuances to how you position your minions, which ones you play when, especially now that Zoo doesn't just have these minions that stick on the board. They have to be very careful with what they play into.
Interesting. Willing to trade in here the Power of Overwhelming and just play the Flame Imp off curve. So he's really just trying to get the Flame Imp onto the board first, and he just wants to make sure that whatever gets played, he can play Direwolf Alpha or Dark Iron Dwarf and keep his options open. I think that's a really good halfway point to make sure that he's not too much one way or direct by the other direction. Because sometimes you play Direwolf Alpha, but you don't have actual minions you want to trade into it. It's a little bit awkward that way.
Right, so we are going to see the Dark Iron Dwarf come down, and that Forbidden Ritual can just sit in hand, and Forbidden Ritual is a very interesting card introduced with Whispers of the Old Gods in terms of when you play it, because there's always going to be the temptation to just jam it down on a turn where you don't have like a very clear play, to put down a lot of, you know, obviously 1/1 icky tentacles. But you kind of want to see a little bit more in the way of board removal or something that signifies that it's okay to reload it there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And look at Zoo charging forward, commanding the board against Shaman, taking away option after option. Loyan has Doomhammer to strike down the Direwolf and the Flame Imp. But the bigger picture is, how do you deal with this Dark Councilman? And more importantly, how are you going to deal with the fact that like a Forbidden Ritual fills up the board completely, followed up by a Direwolf Alpha? This is going to be a huge opportunity for George C to commandingly seize the game.
Oh, he's got a great follow-up too in Gormok. So if that board does not get dealt with, he's just going to play Gormok actually out now as opposed to Forbidden Ritual, which honestly I kind of expected the Forbidden Ritual. You can jack up the power of Darkshire Councilman pretty rapidly there and obviously create this big board, but goes ahead, plays down Gormok, plays down the Direwolf. Playing around, I would guess Lightning Storm there.
Yeah, playing around Lightning Storm is a possibility. And it's also like, do you still kind of want to Lightning Storm this board? It's like Lightning Storm's a little bit weaker. So it felt like this is an opportunity for George to also load up similar power. If you think about it, Direwolf plus the Gormok is almost around the same amount of power. Yes, you get six stats, but you have to remember that George is trying to make sure to pressure his opponent out of the game. He doesn't want to give his opponent time at all.
All right, we see him go ahead and just take 2 health off the Darkshire Councilman because of the way he's positioned those wolves with the Flame Tongue Totem, trying to get rid of it if it does trade in. I feel like I see this board state so often in this matchup where it's like basically the last stand is to make the wolves, put the Flame Tongue Totem in between, and just hope that's enough. Obviously, Zoo is really good at making minions, though, so it's not like you ever truly get the full board clear against Zoo.
Yeah, there's not much for George to do. He would probably have to life tap, even though you could just trade minions and flood the board with Forbidden Ritual, just because you want more cards to keep up with Shaman. The leverage that you have with the Warlock hero power is that much greater when you're at such a health advantage. And yeah, I mean, he could have gotten 7 1/1s, but you don't know if that other card ends up being Leroy, for example, and you plan your turns around that accordingly.
Right, Thing from Below, Loyan has the second one in hand, and it's going to come down for just 2. And this is a card which does make this matchup a little bit better because you do get the giant 5/5 with Taunt as a very good tempo play overall. So having 2 of them very early on is great for Loyan, and starts hacking away at these tentacles. Now he's down to 5 health, but he feels a little bit better having that giant Taunt up.
Yeah, has a taunt, but it's not going to stand for much longer. Brand Bronzebeard plus the Abuser Sergeant is just 1 minion needed to commit to it, and then George C has a very good follow-up in the Imp Gang boss. So he's getting there. He's not exactly quite over the hump just yet, but it doesn't feel like any sequence of draws here from Loyan is going to win him the game.
Yeah, goes ahead and trades in one of those tentacles into the boosted up Searing Tongue Totem, playing around possibly something like Thunderbluff Valiant, which we do see come down. So heady play by him, and honestly, he's in a commanding enough state where if a taunt did not come off the Totemic Call hero power, it was going to be a very bad situation for Loyan.
Yeah, there was a very small chance that Loyan rolled a taunt totem. He could have traded, play even the Rock Bite, or just like maybe hit one thing, go face, but it would have been in trouble either way. So that's going to wrap it up, and game number 1 goes to the Warlock. Now, this is a significant win because this is the matchup that you're favored in,
right,
at least on paper. It doesn't always go to the deck that's favored. I mean, it's card games for a reason, right?
Right.
Sometimes the Shaman can overpower, or sometimes Drew draws a little bit awkwardly. But a very big win, because that's going according to Loyan's game plan. Imagine if his Shaman lost, or sorry, his Warlock lost, and the Shaman got through, and then all of a sudden he has to deal with other matchups that are awkward.
Right, that is the matchup that Zoo really has to win. That's one of the reasons you bring it, is to deal with Shaman. And when you're looking at what you're going to be banning out, obviously bringing the Freeze Mage, he's planning on banning Warriors, so it's important to be able to address Shaman in a very reasonable and predictable capacity.
Now, keep in mind that Freeze Mage was banned on George's side, so there's an interesting dynamic that exists here from Loyan's perspective. It's like, what do I queue up here next? And a lot of times you can argue in Conquest that ultimately if you just kind of pick whatever you feel the most comfortable, it's okay. But there's one thing that does tend to happen here, is that people choose to pick the deck again. So I wonder if Loyan, being a Shaman loyalist, so to speak, because he's been using it as his claim to fame, I wonder if he's just going to queue up Shaman again, and that might give Loyan the small edge to queue up his Warrior deck, which might have a better chance against it. So I kind of like this choice here from George, because kind of reading your opponent based on how they feel. You can see even just by the body language of Loyan, he was not happy with how that game is, and a lot of times people just insta-call and they pick it again. That might give you your best chances.
Right. I don't necessarily want to go too far down the rabbit hole of conquest psychology. It's a argument I've had with a number of players since I've started casting, which is trying to predict what your opponents are going to pick. But as you said, a lot of the time, they do just pick the same thing they lost with.
Yeah.
And George C makes that read, goes ahead and brings out that mid-range tempo warrior, whatever we're calling it. But Leroy Jenkins in hand, and we highlighted that earlier, that is not a regular inclusion. Now, admittedly, this list is still somewhat new and kind of going through the refinement process, and we've seen players like Xiao and Orange kind of give it their own tunings to what they want in it, but Leroy's definitely not a usual card.
Yeah, I mean, Leroy Jenkins is a card that's usually seen in aggressive decks, or, even combo-oriented decks. Warrior doesn't exactly have a lot of ways to combo. I think if you look at Leroy, one of the only ways you can truly buff it is Rampage, and I don't see that in the deck list. So a very interesting choice indeed. I think it's because George is anticipating a lot of control decks, and while tempo decks are great at punishing decks that draw a little bit too slow, a little bit too awkwardly, sometimes there's almost nothing you can do because your opponent outmuscles you, and Leroy might just be the extra gas to put you over the hump.
Dan, we were talking earlier about the fact that I've never seen a Tuskar Totemic give anything other than Totem Golem. There's the Searing Totem. I said it didn't happen.
Yeah, specifically you said, I've never seen it give Searing Totem.
I'm so sorry, Loyan. This is, I did this.
And you cursed him as such. George, by the way, not having weapons, not having much to do except play the Fierce Monkey. Loyan also had a very interesting choice the previous turn where he chose not to attack with a Tunnel Truck. And I think it's because he's so in tune with how the deck needs card draw and needs cards like Battle Rage to get off at least 2 draws. So he's saying, I'm going to make sure that you don't get the draw unless I'm really sure that I have a strong board ahead of time. So now, like, for example, even if he attacks into it, he has a Taunt Totem, he still can't get the Battle Rage, even if he was able to attack with the weapon. And he's still choosing not to.
I was going to say, why not take off the armor there? That does legitimately confuse me, because you could just bring him down to 30, and that's not something I have any experience with. I get not wanting to activate Battle Rage, but not attacking for the 2 armor, a little confusing to me.
It is interesting because, like you said, the weapon and the taunt doesn't provide it, but I think he's saying, like, I'm not ready to win the game at all, so yes, I could put you to the edge, but I still won't even necessarily be able to attack you. So I think he's saying I want to go for more commanding board position before I push into it, because they can force the issue. They can just, like, put the weapon, even sometimes buff minions and then try to attack into it. So I don't necessarily hate the play, but I am a little bit interested by that as well.
Right, worth bringing up, we see 2 Battle Rages now in the hand of George C, and those are dead cards. No damage minions, his hero has not been damaged, so forced to just throw down the Acolyte, really the only play he had available. Maybe use that second Execute, but he's already used the 1, and you see that giant 7/7 on the board. That's an interesting call from Loyan if he just chooses to put the 7 into there. Will be executable now. Yeah.
Based off his previous trends, he hasn't been attacking, and you can just, like, look at it and be like, well, he's missed around 6 damage by now. And if he ends up being 6 damage off, you might immediately associate, well, Loyan just, like, lost the game. That's not necessarily true, because if George had the ability to draw with cards, then that dynamic would shift a lot. Maybe he would have an ability to draw deeper into the deck, answer the board a little bit more effectively. As a result, snowball the board.
Right, and George C now forced to forego Cairn. Just can't leave that 7/6 up. Just wouldn't make any sense in the world. But plays down the Armor Smith, uses his second Execute. So from here on out, Loyan knows what this deck is, has seen the deck list as other players have. So doesn't need to really play around Brawl. Has a lot of totems on board heading into the Thunderbolt Valiant turn next turn.
Yeah, and a large reason stems from George not having a lot of early minion curve. He drew both Executes and Leroy. He didn't have weapons. He didn't have any of his Bloodhoof Braves to really bully the Shaman board. And this is one of those really awkward situations too on Loyan's end. He missed another Flame Juggler on a minion, and he really wanted that to land. Chooses not to attack the phase, nor choose to hit the Armor Smith. And for good reason. Once again, Armor Smith can't get damage. You can't draw with Battle Rage.
Ooh, now this, obviously we were just talking about the fact that Thunderbolt Valiant can come down. You can use the hero power to buff those totems, but maybe Hex is just a better answer overall. Just get that Cairn off the board. Don't have to worry about him getting value from it, because the rest of George C's hand is incredibly clunky right now.
Yeah, I agree. You can debate whether or not you want to hero power. If you choose to hero power, that means your board is full, and that gives you less flexibility of playing stuff. He also only has 1 Primal Fusion in the deck, so it's not like having a board full of totems guarantees him to play something the following turn and draw. By the way, Certainly Murgleton, if it gets life tap, is absolutely game-changing at this point because it seems like Loyan's taking the slow road, and he's gotten the life tap.
That is exactly what he needed. The rest of his hand was pretty poor, but has the ability to start drawing a bunch of cards now, and Loyan has 7 minions on the board, but it's not necessarily the 7 most powerful minions on the board, 4 of which being totems.
Yeah. That's a pretty good card, though, the Mana-Tide Totem. I see your life tap, and I raise you a free one every single turn.
Right, like the old Michael Jordan, anything you can do, I can do better commercials there. Both players have a lot of card draw now. They're going to be getting a lot of resources.
That was pre-recorded.
What?
The Michael Jordan Mia Hamm commercial.
No. That was not, Dan, but I knew you would appreciate it.
I'm not trying to shatter your childhood illusions, Rob. But
I had a McDonald's reference later, but I don't think I'm going to end up using it now.
they don't sponsor HCT, at least not yet.
That's fair.
Slam to draw a card. If he picks up Whirlwind, that'd be nice. Malkarok for a weapon. Draws a Gore Howl. Are you serious?
That is
wow.
So that is really good, but at the same time, with 4 totems down, obviously one of which is Mana-Tide.
There's nothing better though, Rob. Actually, the only thing
Doomhammer. Would Doomhammer be
debatable. I mean,
but you can start clearing things faster with this. Like, you're just going to be ending up clearing this, and if he just keeps toteming, at this rate, there's a 50% chance he just gets the taunt totem again, if you kill it.
I mean, you have slam. Okay, yeah, you're right. In the sense, you can just clear the totems and get faster, but I mean,
it's really good. It's not Light's
outcome.
Justice. That certainly would have been like worst case scenario, but
yeah, you know, there's a lot of bad outcomes. Cursed Blade is one of them, of course. Light's Justice is another one. But even if you get like Argent Lance and Perdition's Blade, these are really weak weapons, and you'd much rather have cards like that. I mean, ultimately, the Taunt Totem has been the bane of Warrior's existence since the dawn of this matchup.
Right.
This is why, you know, traditionally, Shamans always felt like they had the edge over Warrior, because the Taunt Totem blocks their effectiveness in a lot of areas.
Right, so we are going to see Loyan just trade some of those things into Malkarok, and I gotta say, when we were looking at Whispers of the Old Gods, Malkarok was not a card I was expecting to see a lot of play, but it certainly made some waves in this deck thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like Malkarok for a lot of reasons. I think it gives a lot. Oh my goodness, Harrison Jones off the top for Loyan so he can shut down the Gore Howl. I mean, as if he needed another way to secure his and I want to say imminent victory, because right now George C is in a very, very, very bad spot, despite having good outcome on his Malkarok.
Yeah, and despite having life tap too, that just goes to show you how far behind he is in this particular matchup.
I mean, the battle rages here are very nice. I almost anticipate that if he doesn't draw something very good soon, the game is just over. But he does end up picking some really powerful cards. Okay, so it's a brand new game. Having Harrison and Rag is very decent if your opponent picks up the Doomhammer, but Harrison on this Gore Howl is just devastating.
Yeah, we see George C kind of give a little shake of his head. That is really bad for him. Yeah, the Gore Howl would have given him some much-needed value to keep clearing this board. Yeah, yes, we do see that that Taunt Totem has just remained in play, but we're going to see a free thing from below, and there is no Brawl in this deck. Loyan's aware of that. You just keep playing, overreaching as far as you want, and forcing the Warrior to have answers to the situation.
Might be one of those times where you just pray for Rag to hit the right outcome here. Everything else feels a little bit awkward. He does pick up a Fiery War Axe, which improves his odds of sniping a 5-attack minion. And if you can't snipe a 5-attack minion, Mana-Tide Totem is also an eligible candidate for death.
I was going to say, there's I think like 3 outcomes. Nope. Yeah, that was not one of the good ones. Right. No, what that? Oh, and another free thing from below, but Thunderbluff Valiant. He's going to have to trade in something, I believe.
Yeah, you just trade in Harrison, so that way you hero power.
Yeah.
Get the effective trade there.
Loyan's
he's feeling himself right now. Normally you see players really take their time to evaluate plays, but it's been generally straightforward from this point on. Loyan just keeps pressing in his board control. Mana-Tide Totem drawing a lot of cards. And, I mean, George really doesn't have answers. Minions are too late.
No, Loyan's board in Sweet Sweater Game. It's too much for George C, so George C going to go ahead and concede this one, and we're going to have a tie game.
I'm feeling Loyan, man.
Yeah, no, I like this. It looks like something...
For unrelated fashion
right.
reasons.
I was going to say, that's like a Russell Westbrook-style sweater on the podium after the game, so hats off to him for tying up the series.
So, a much-needed victory for his Shaman. So that leaves Paladin for Logan, as well as Warlock, his Reno Leroy combo finisher. So he's got Paladin and Warlock up against the Warrior and Shaman. How's the outlook now that this best of 5 has effectively reset to a best of 3?
I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure. So obviously, Loyan has that N'Zoth Paladin, which I think could be problematic, although Aggro Shaman is still available, and that's certainly one thing where if the N'Zoth Paladin draws some of its late game bombs or doesn't necessarily draw the things it needs, it can just fall behind and lose. I don't know. I honestly would think Loyan has the advantage here if I had to pick, but Dan, what do you think?
I mean, I would kind of still give the nod to George. I think the Shaman is still a very problematic class. Loyan had to ban Freeze Mage because he was expecting his ward to be gone. Therefore, he felt like it was just an unfavored thing. Right. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, it's a Shaman sometimes, if it doesn't draw well, or in this case, the Warrior drew a little bit awkwardly too, you miss a step and then you're very far behind. So I'm not willing to call it out, but I definitely think George has a pretty good edge here because the N'Zoth Paladin deck, I think its biggest fear always is whether or not they draw Doomsayer on turn 2.
Yeah.
So it's if they don't have it, then Shaman just runs away. And it doesn't matter if you have Equality. You need to actually have Consecration or Pyromancer with it. So sometimes you do have the answer, but not in time, and then you're dead anyways. You can't really stop Doomhammer. Tough stuff to swallow here for the Paladin. So I'm still giving the nod to George.
I think the N'Zoth Paladin is, of all the decks we've been seeing so far, I would say in DreamHack Austin and here today, is one of the decks that I'm most curious about to see if it sticks in the competitive meta. Because yes, it is extremely powerful. Yeah. Obviously, if it gets to that late game, it can just win. But you have a couple of different, or a few different things going on in that deck. You have board clears, you have the big heals like Forbidden Healing, some are running Lay on Hands, although not so much anymore, and then you have those bombs like Cairn, you have Eadric the Pure who does a lot of work, but you kind of need the right things in the right order, as is true with most control decks, but I feel like the three different things are all very much polarized and there's not a lot of wiggle room. So if you come up against that Aggro Shaman that just gets that good curve, or even the Zoo deck, right, that you can't necessarily clear off the board, sure, you can lose out, and very curious to see where that deck ends up landing like a month from now.
I think Control Paladin is here to stay for a while. I think the big thing about control decks in general is just tools.
Right.
People, the large reason why Warrior class is such a passionate following from some players. You look at Show, you look at Fibonacci, you look at Kit Kats, all these players that love playing Warrior. The reason why is they all have one thing in common. They feel like Warrior can beat anything. As long as you make sure you outfit your deck correctly. You have the right removal options, you have the good life game options, you have the right amount of AoE. Control Paladin's slowly getting there. You have Eadric the Pure for mass AoE to stop to reduce the attack. You have some healing options now. You have some legitimate area of effect. Like we've seen people even play Enter the Colosseum. It's not exactly the most effective clear, but it actually works a lot of the times. And now it's finally getting their tools, and I believe it's a very vindicated feeling for, I think, the Team 5 people, the balance designers, because a lot of times people kind of made fun of some of the Paladin cards. When they were reviewing cards, they were like, yeah, well, this would probably go in a Control Paladin, but no one ever plays Control Paladin at the time. They kind of mocked some of those cards. They mocked Eadric, they mocked Enter the Colosseum. They're even underestimating Forbidden Healing, and these are some of the most powerful cards that are available to a Control Paladin.
Right, it is extremely satisfying to see Eadric the Pure finally kind of doing some work, because when the Grand Tournament was being previewed, that was one of the cards I was super excited about.
Yeah.
But obviously at the time, Paladin has Muster for Battle, Shielded Minibot, lends itself more to that mid-range style, whereas now without those tools, with the introduction of Standard, it forces Paladin to be a little more sufferable in playing against it.
It's a really good argument. A lot of people always look at, Halazeel, the new Shaman Legendary. They look at Cho'Gall, and they look at, these cards aren't necessarily bad at all. Like, if you look at Cho'Gall, it's, awesome. You get to play a spell for your life, and you can usually even play with that if you want to lower your own life totals for other cards. But the point is that would you rather just play better versions of stuff? Would you rather play a better Shaman deck that instead of a control deck, you can play a very proactive, fast Shaman that's very consistent? It's the same argument against a lot of these other cards that are now seeing play. Like, you could play a control Eadric deck in Paladin, but it's much weaker than a mid-range version or ones that play secrets back in the day. And now we see the same exact thing with Warrior. Would you rather play a control Warrior? Would you rather play a patron Warrior? When you can see a lot of these effective Temple Warriors still having a lot of impact in the metagame.
Yeah, and Pirate Warrior, certainly is going to be a thing which, when Miracle Rogue reaches its pinnacle, that's when Pirate Warrior is just going to come out yell of ass and just begin hitting rogues in the face. But yeah, to your point, aggro decks tend to have that consistency. They tend to have that, they're a lot faster to play, so you'll probably see them more often when it comes to what kind of modes you design your deck with. But we're going to see that Reno lock right here from Loyan, and George C is going to stick with that Tempo Warrior.
George seems to be very distracted, based off his surroundings. He keeps looking around. It probably is just because when you're young and you're kind of putting in front of the camera, sometimes you get a little bit restless there. And I hope that he can kind of keep composure, but it looks like he is relatively calm. I mean, he's been making pretty solid plays based off what his hand's been given, and we'll see if he can carry over this momentum. Or will Loyan be the one going off of his win, be able to turn the series around?
You know, we've seen some of these younger players come in and have that success where they do have that composure. They're not intimidated. They get in front of the camera and they do just fine. So there's everything to suggest that Hearthstone is a young man's game.
Well, I mean, if you really think about it, it's kind of like how, you know, I sometimes still go rock climbing back. Like, I used to do it a lot in college. And I always see kids just be so fearless climb to the top. They really just have no sense of, like, danger at all, right? And in some capacity, like we see Amnesiac, Georgec, like they're just playing the game so much that they don't even really think about outside factors like nerves as much.
Right, and they both tend to bring these kind of interesting tech cards with their deck compositions. You know, we've saw Amnesiac bringing a lot of interesting stuff to his rogue decks, his warrior decks at the Winter Championship, and, you know, Leroy in this tempo warrior. So might be something to be said for that attitude.
By the way, George did do something very cheeky. He was like, you know, implying that he had the coin to use it on a play. And he's still kind of doing a little bit of that, trying to see if he can give information of whether or not he should use the coin. There is legitimacy to coining at the Fierce Monkey, but I still think you're better off using your coin for even like playing 3, 4, and then coin a Cairn on 5, so you can have a better board presence there.
The Cairn is a very strong play, I think, if you can. I mean, it's strong on 6, but having it out sooner is just that much better. And with Ironbeak Owl effectively cycled out of the meta for now, the odds of it just being cleanly removed are very slim. We do see Spellbreaker now in Loyan's hand.
Yeah, it's going to be a good card for sure. You don't really have too many targets. I mean, it might even be the point where Spellbreaker feels tempted to go down on a Bloodhoof Brave or even another minion, depending on how George chooses to line up his threats.
Would be interesting if he did that, considering he does know the lineup. I would have to imagine Loyan is gonna pass on putting that on silencing something like Bloodhoof Brave, but it certainly is possible.
Yeah, I definitely like playing Fierce Monkey, even though you could put out the Bloodhoof Brave and potentially get a very clean kill on the Dark Peddler, and it activates its Rage ability. It feels like getting the Cairn out with the coin just feels so much stronger on turn 5.
Yeah, we see Loyan just drop that Doomsayer. That is something that is going to force George C to kind of evaluate his options. But we see Core Chrono Elite comes out. George C does not evaluate for very long. Just gets rid of that Doomsayer, has that convenient turn 4 at play, and can still coin out Cairn next turn if he wants to.
Absolutely, and that's kind of like exactly what this deck is at its core. That is the tempo that you're looking for. Having a very commanding board position. You don't necessarily care if you know, you can get a lot of value. I mean, you do get a free trade, but you want to present yourself with the most power on board as possible every turn. Now he's introduced with a couple of interesting options. He has 2 Bloodhoof Braves. You can keep the coin as well for Ragnaros.
Ooh, but we see the Kodo in the hand of Loyan, and that is one of those classic cards that has really kind of been bumped up in the power rankings since the introduction of Standard. It's Kodo, Sylvanas, Doomsayer, Crazed Alchemist. These are all cards that are right back in the meta since Standard and Whisper of the Old Gods have come out.
Yeah, it's a bit of a renaissance, if you will, of some of the old cards that were established back in the meta when it was much slower. We also had less cards, you know, limited card pool. But now, Stampede Kodo, one of the hardest removals that you can have for some of these cards, like Doomsayer, like Bloodhoof Brave.
Yeah, Bloodhoof Brave is a very, very beefy card too, so just being able to get rid of it by playing your own minion is a huge win for Loyan.
Both players are playing rather quickly, and it's an interesting and honestly kind of refreshing pace compared to some of the previous series. I think the control matchups have so many decisions and things in turn planning, but it's pretty straightforward with some of George's decks. He's trying to set up the board, trying to make sure he posture himself to kill the deck, because a deck like Loyan, which plays Reno Lock, it's also just going to keep life tapping. I love the inclusion of Alex Straza. It sets the health at a much more reasonable expectation to use Leroy Jenkins and the power overwhelming.
Yeah, Alex Straza is a tool that I think we're starting to see less in Freeze Mage and more in a couple of other decks, because as you said, it makes reliable health totals, and Big Game Hunter may cost 5 mana, but he is still very much in this meta, especially in something like Reno Warlock, where you do have the option to include those one-off tech cards.
Yeah, and again, another deliberate choice by Loyan to not attack here, to make sure that Battle Rage is less effective. It's very clear that George doesn't have weapons at all, at least at the moment. Maybe he would have drawn it, but don't give your opportunity to draw cards at all. It's what really makes the engine go. And that's one thing that George has constantly been put in, like awkward situations where he can't exactly use his hand to his maximum effect. So he chooses to slam just to remove. I mean, you can even see how fast both of these players are playing. Like, Loyan's tapping last. Normally you see a lot of players really evaluate the play, tap first, do stuff. But, I mean, his plays aren't exactly wrong. I think nothing would have changed him from big game hunting last turn.
So when you're in the situation as George C and you're playing against Reno Warlock, you understand that your opponent's deck is just full of answers. It just depends on which ones they have. And I'm kind of curious if his thought process of playing the first Bloodhoof Brave when he did was to hope to get it out sooner to maybe dodge Kodo. You know, maybe it's not sitting in the hand. We saw him just jam down the Ragnaros. Again, you know your opponent has Big Game Hunter. So maybe it's just one of those things where you play the threat sooner, hoping to dodge the potential answer. Because again, Reno Warlock is one-offs.
Yeah, it's definitely something to consider. I think George also just wanted to keep the coin because he realized he had the ability to play Ragnaros.
Sure.
And I don't really hate that at all. Now, what I do hate is feeling like this as the tempo deck. Your opponent actually sees complete tempo. Cards like Power Overwhelming just picks up the best trade possible, and now you're super far behind. You have to use 3 cards here to try to get yourself back onto the board. But, I mean, it just feels like you're fighting from a losing spot. Loyan's got a lot of options. He can even squeeze in life taps from this position.
Well, this goes back to just the golden age of handlock versus control warrior back in the day. And what happens is, Warlock's life tapping pretty much every turn. They're getting the cards. As the warrior, you start to run out of cards. Battle Rage is a powerful draw engine, but look, the Warlock's drawing a card a turn, right? Just clockwork.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to be addressing every single threat you put down immediately because of the healing and because of the finality of their win condition. So George C rather low on cards, and Leroy is an interesting inclusion, but thus far it's really not paying the bills for him.
Nah, Leroy's just that bum and roommate, just sticking around, taking up hand space.
Leroy's just sleeping on your couch. Like, are you getting a job, man? Like, what are you doing?
He's got something in the pipeline, man. Just give him time.
Look,
okay?
he saw something on Craigslist. He sent an email.
He's got a great idea. He just needs somebody to listen to it.
He's going back to community college next semester, but Leroy, unfortunately, going to sit in the hand a little bit longer. It looks like Ravaging Ghoul and Execute come into the hand of George C, but it's kind of plays down the Grom and. Look how many cards are in Loyan's hand. Like, do you think that Grom's going to possibly survive?
It's not even necessarily that, like, the fact that Grom is, like, a bad play. George doesn't have anything in the hand.
Yep.
And Loyan just played the control style, of the control side of this matchup very well, making sure to budget all of his resources. It's a little bit easy to get lost in the speed of the play and just kind of feel like everything has autopilot. But, I feel like George did have the curve. And Loyan did manage to budget of all of his resources correctly here. And squeezing in life taps is ultimately the mark of a good handlock player or a good control warlock player. And I feel like he's done an excellent job of that.
Yeah, we are just going to see Alex Straza comes down. And to your point, it doesn't look like a lot of thought is going into these turns. But when you're young, you just think faster. Like, that's just what it is. Like, I think incredibly slowly even when I play Face Hunter. Like, where's that Wolf Rider going? These guys, though?
I think more specifically, it's just that, like, for George's perspective here, he doesn't really have anything much to do because he's built his deck in this way. That's why, he's holding Leroy for multiple turns, and sometimes you get it stuck in your hand. We're kind of making jokes about Leroy being the equivalent of an unemployed roommate, but the fact is true. If that was Varian Rin, he'd be playing. He'd be drawing cards. He'd be doing other stuff. But as a result, he has to play slightly more aggressive, or he has to play in this fashion of trying to curve out, and it just happens to play into the perfect hand of the Reno Lock, which if Reno Lock draws the right answers, they really won't lose.
Yeah, there was a great quote from Chalky after he won DreamHack Austin when he was being interviewed, and he actually just said pretty much that, which is, hey, if Reno Warlock gets the answers and gets the draws in the right order, it's really hard to actually beat them. It's borderline impossible in his opinion.
Yeah, and I think there's like a testament to like why people have ignored Reno Lock, but yet are starting to change their opinion of it. As you can see that this is very close to lethal. So I think it's 1 damage off right now.
Not only is it very close to lethal, but George C is kind of on an escalator nowhere. He's not really doing anything. He's just throwing down a Frothing Berserker. He's like, oh, okay, there you go. He's already lost his Grom. This is his second Frothing. Doesn't have like the big Varian Rin win condition. Doesn't have Arch Thief or Fom, so he's kind of exhausted his pool of win conditions already.
And to go back to what I was saying, this is like how you built your deck, so you have to kind of live with the consequences. You can't necessarily just stay like, well, you know, I'm going to build this deck, but in the end I got unlucky. It's like, well, this is how you outfitted your deck, so that way you can try to kill decks like this. Because imagine the opposite scenario happened. Well, this is a good draw, Battle Rage. But imagine if George C was able to build the board. He could use Leroy to take out a chunk of health and maybe even win the game. It's just not the case here whatsoever.
Yeah, we talked about George C had a really good curve. He had the coin, was able to get those big threats out early. Unfortunately, you know, Loyan had the answers.
Is this a potential game changer?
Doomhammer? Doomhammer, are you there? Pick up.
Doomhammer would be pretty big, but...
Pick up, it's George C.
No, that's a Fiery War Axe, and while that's cool, that's going to be the end of the game here. There's nothing that George can really do except hit his opponent straight in the face, and Loyan's got a lot of damage waiting on the other end, so even though he went down 0-1 early on, Loyan is charging back here.
Quite literally charging back. Good call, Dan.
Yeah.
Good call.
George C not even going to let his opponent get the satisfaction of being able to get the final point to damage it.
See a little bit of banter between the two. We saw the extraordinary come out from Loyan. George C actually ended the first game with a well played, so a little bit of a cheeky banter again, since this is a Europe-based tournament.
Yeah, like I said, man, people compare Loyan with Amnesiac a lot, just in terms of like the fact that he's always compared to he's always evaluated based off his age, but he's a very good player. Right. But also sometimes they get a little bit hot-headed if they feel like they're winning or they're losing, and you know, it's really interesting to see that dynamic come into play here. But George is very much respected amongst the circle of players that he's in. I mean, you can see that he also feels confident to bring a deck like Freeze Mage, but it's not going to be relevant at all, which is kind of a shame because I want to see how effective his tech is. If you look at George's deck lists, he's playing Tournament Medic in his Freeze Mage. That's a really cool inclusion that I didn't necessarily think about as a replacement to some of the other heal cards that rotated out with Standard.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tournament Medic, the only other player I've ever really seen use that to great effect is Fibonacci, who was running that in his version of Control Warrior. So kind of interesting to see Tournament Medic come back, and I don't think it's a card that most people are super high on in this format, but Loyan, one more deck left. He just has to get it done with that N'Zoth Paladin. So, as we mentioned, very powerful deck, Dan. It's one you're very sure is sticking around for some time to come. Justicar Trueheart included in it, and this is another one of those cards that has really kind of gained prominence, I think, in Standard format.
Yeah, Justicar Trueheart seeing more play than just Warrior there, but this is a great opening hand for Loyan. He's got Pyromancer quality and a Humility. That means
substantially less great hand for George C.
Oh, you're right. Oh my goodness, 2 Doomhammers? I mean, Doomhammer's great. In fact, Doomhammer, to much people's chagrin, is probably one of the highest, is probably like public enemy #1 these days in terms of what people are really not enjoying to lose against. But at the same time, you don't want it for a long time, and this is one of the drawbacks of playing 2 Doomhammers.
You definitely don't want 2, that is for sure. Not in your opening hand. Maybe over the course of the game, when you're trying to destroy a deck that has so much healing, fine, but yeah, this is Loyan having a pretty good opening, and we've seen George C did manage to get that Flame Juggler. He has the, Argent Horse Rider as well, so he is starting to piece something together. He's going to have on turn 4 that Flame Wreath Faceless, but you almost never want to play it against N'Zoth Paladin. There's just so many ways to reduce attack to 1, and then you're, still stuck paying the bill, basically on this Flame Wreath Faceless you bought. That isn't any good anymore.
Yeah, and I agree with George here. I think I'd rather take the turn to set up a Doomhammer instead. Yep. There's Alder Peacekeeper, there's Humility, there's Keeper of Oldemon. There's also the turn for your opponent to Pyromancer Equality if they really felt like they needed to.
Yeah, he could have actually kept the coin there to use with Wild Pyromancer at some point, just to do 1 spread damage and then possibly use like a Humility.
Oh no.
But he plays down that Kodo and is rewarded by getting the best possible result.
That is a huge outcome there, because George was planning for that Argent Horse Rider to do 2 damage a turn for a while because it's so problematic to remove. Loyan couldn't help but chuckle at that one, and for good reason. That was a very big outcome there for Kodo.
Yeah, and George C evaluating his options. Now, if he equips the Doomhammer, Loyan kind of has control of the board. He's going to go ahead and get rid of that Flame Juggler, presumably, with the Stampeding Kodo. So he's kind of lost the board at that point. And as the Aggro Shaman player, and that's exactly what this deck is. It's Aggro Shaman. It's not that mid-range variant. He's pretty much abandoning the board, and he's going to have to get it done with that Doomhammer, with the spells. And it's kind of a scary proposition to just put all your cards on the table like that as George C.
Yeah, but it's definitely one of the better outcomes that Loyan could hope for. No Tunnel Trog, no Feral Spirits early on to really swing the board. But, I mean, at the same time, Loyan's going to need a little bit more than just this. He needs healing, he needs taunts, he needs things to do, and he's playing Pyromancer on turn 5. This is one of the things that's like, Equality is one of the, and Consecration are some of the better cards to have, but you don't want to have just these cards. You need to have actual minions to play.
I was going to say, I don't hate that play because sitting in your hand, you've got double Equality, you've got a Consecration, you've got a Wild Pyromancer, so the suite is still there if the board gets developed for you to deal with it pretty handily. So playing down the Wild Pyromancer just to put some pressure on the Shaman to react actually feels pretty okay to me.
No, it definitely feels good because the thing about the Shaman deck is, especially with 2 Doomhammers, you're going to just keep drawing damage. And Paladin needs to find a way to win the game. And Loyan's now suffering from the mid-game, oh man, the mid-game draws where it's just, you don't have things to do, and you're giving Shaman time to just draw and hit you in the face with Doomhammer.
This was the point I was making earlier. The Paladin has ways to deal with the board. It has N'Zoth as the late-game win condition in hand, but now it needs healing. So that's that third thing it really needs at the moment because it's just getting hit in the face over and over by Doomhammer. And again, we even see a second one in hand, so it needs to start finding answers.
Yeah, so 2 Equalities, 2 Doomsayers. I mean, these are the cards, like you said, you want early game if your opponent is playing a very swarm-centric approach, but Loyan picks up yet another card that he can't necessarily play right now, but the good news is he can play Tyrion the following turn, and he can even resummon Tyrion if he gets the turn to play N'Zoth. But with the Lava Burst being drawn, I mean, George is in a pretty good spot to pick up one more piece of direct damage, and he should be able to end the game.
I was going to say, do you play the Lava Burst this turn, or you just wait? I would assume you wait because you don't want to give your opponent any more information in terms of like where they're actually at.
Yeah, you want to just kind of surprise your opponent if possible. But Loyan finally plays his first serious candidate to push against the board, or dominate the board, excuse me. George is a couple points off, but he can actually start playing minions now because his opponent just chained Doomsayers. And if Loyan's able to survive a couple of turns here, I mean, he can resummon Tyrion as a full taunt, and that shouldn't be underestimated either.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point to consider here is George C understands that if Loyan clears the board, it's going to be through something like Equality Consecrate, which will bring Tyrion down to 1 health, which makes him substantially easier to get through. So it's kind of an interesting point here, is Loyan has to clear the board, but he also has to diminish the value of his Tyrion overall to do so.
All right, well, he has a couple of options. He can Consecration with Pyromancer and then just use Peacekeeper. I think that's the cleanest. You do 1 damage to your Tyrion, but your opponent's proven that he doesn't have like Hex or anything. He would have certainly Hex and pushed the damage. And now you can actually go face... Oh, he chooses to clear. He's afraid of Flame Tongue Totems and Abusive Sergeants.
I think I like that. I like that. I mean, he did end up clearing the board. I was wrong. Like, he was able to clear the board without using the Equality. So Tyrion's still sitting at 4 health, and that Lava Burst can get through, and then you can start hitting with the Doomhammer again. But as you said, N'Zoth is sitting there on turn 10.
And that ends up being the right play, because Flame Tongue Totem plus the Doomhammer would have been just lethal. Oh man, he Lava Burst to get past Tyrion so he can get the final damage pieces in for the following turn, but Tyrion can come back! Did you miss me?
Don't count a good Paladin out, and I think that's exactly what we're going to see unless Forbidden Healing!
Oh man, Loyan draws the Nuts card! Not only is Forbidden Healing going to be able to heal for 20, but he also should be able to clear the board with this.
And then on the turn after, he can just resummon Tyrion. Ooh. I think he's figuring out right now if he wants to use something like Humility first, to possibly with that Pyromancer get stuff off the board. And then, 18 healing, still really good.
Yeah, there's no point in like rushing right now. You're like, oh, Forbidden Healing for 20. You can also heal for 18 if you want to drop into Humility as well. You can also attack face, Equality, and Forbidden Healing for 16. All these are like really viable plays.
Loyan just has to figure out how he wants to sequence it out, but he is right on the doorstep of righting this ship and just taking the series.
Move quickly.
I don't mind like playing the Forbidden Healing to share for 20. Oh, sorry, for 20. But at the same time, it's like you still want to also try to go face because you're trying to win against the Shaman. Yes, you're up to 21, but what if he's holding 2 Rock Biters and all of a sudden, you're actually still not exactly within the save zone.
Dan, what are you doing? There's one.
Dude, that's a lot of damage right back. But then Tyrion's waiting on the other end. And a not-so-happy reunion's about to be met with George. He's holding on to the Rockbiter because he's thinking, I need to surprise my opponent and make him try to get comfortable. Except... Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot of thought about this. You're just bringing back Tyrion. He's going to go ahead and use the Ashbringer to get past that 2-2 taunt. Georgie's spot is not hopeless.
No, it's definitely not, especially if he picks up a way to get past Tyrion.
Which he doesn't. Really. I mean, he can. He can get through it, but he's not going to.
George C concedes. And well met has never been more appropriate, because you felt like you met Tyrion just a couple turns ago, returning with N'Zoth. And this is the power of that card. You don't need to play N'Zoth for 6 other minions on the board. Some people even play 2 or 3 Death Rattles in their deck. Just having those big legendary minions come back even one time is a lot of inherent value. And in this case, it just needed to summon Tyrion one time for effectively to lock out George C from the game.
I was going to say, there's a big difference between resummoning something like a Shifting Shade if you're a priest versus Tyrion, Taunt, Divine Shield. That's pretty good against Shaman.
Little bit of a difference there.
And here's the crazy thing. George was still only 2 points of damage off at the very end, despite Forbidden Healing for virtually entire spectrum of health there. Despite the fact that he put a lot of walls and he had 2 Pyromancers, 2 Equalities, and Doomsayers. It's despite all of that, George C was still just a couple points off. And that is why, Shaman, you crazy, man. You scary. There's so many things about this deck where it's just it's so hard for you to stop that pressure if it gets going.
Yeah, I think the match with the Reno Lock versus the Warrior was really interesting as well. Loyan's approach to just say, I'm just going to let you play minions. I'm just going to deal with them. I'm not going to hit you so you don't get to Battle Rage and get the card off that. And I'm just going to sit there and watch you just run out of cards. That was really interesting set for me as well.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Upper bracket there, that's 2 Complexity players still alive in the upper bracket, and they're well on their way to top 8 and going to the Europe Spring Championship. So again, great day to be a Complexity fan.
Yeah, definitely. And you see George C actually get knocked into low bracket, but he's still got plenty to play for. And we've seen he played really well overall. It was just didn't quite line up for him in that last game with the Paladin. He had all the answers he needed. Maybe didn't have enough minions to actually pressure himself, which caused George C to actually get really close to lethal multiple times, but just wasn't quite enough there.
Yeah, I think ultimately George. I think his lineup has some interesting quirks into it. I mean, the Leroy could be the reason why he gets that far, but it also seemed to be a reason why he was struggling in some of those games. It just was sitting duck in the hand for a while, and you could always defend that card for a while. Leroy's really good in these matchups, but the fact is, I think there was times where he wished that was a different card, and ultimately the preparation, I think, was a larger factor for that series than necessarily George's decisions that he made.
Yeah, and even the interesting pick as well. What do you think of the Finley in that Warrior deck as well? Not something that's too common in mid-range, a bit of a strange twist there, but he's obviously made it work this far, and I presume it's going to continue to work. I have no doubts it's going to continue through the tournament.
Yeah, it works really well in Patron Warrior because you have multiple options you want.
Yep.
Sometimes in Patron you want the draw cards, of course, but a lot of times you also want the Fireball or the Fire Blast that you get from the Mage Hero power, so you can clone more patrons. Definitely less flexible in a tempo Warrior deck that you care so much about minions and not hero power. In fact, you don't even really want a hero power very often in that deck. So it's a very interesting inclusion, but it actually ended up being one of the reasons why he even stayed competitive in that Shaman game at all. If he didn't have that life tap, he would have just gotten blown out 4 turns earlier.
Right,
Yep.
and to Dan's point, he got that far off the decks he brought. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Which is impressive because I would think Leroy is kind of one of those inclusions you would have in a situation where people don't know your deck list, right?
Right.
The old surprise Leroy, we saw Molagel actually at the America's
Surprise
Championship.
Leroy.
He dropped it on VLPS, and VLPS is just how do you plan for just a surprise Leroy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a really good set overall, but we are going to throw it over to TJ for a player interview and some updates on the bracket.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yeah, big congratulations to Loyan once again. Shaman actually hasn't had that much success today, so it's nice to see it do a little bit better going into these ones, especially the mid-range Shaman. Unfortunately, George C fell with that aggro Shaman. But yeah, Loyan sort of on the forefront of Shaman innovation. I actually have Loyan ready for a winner's interview. Loyan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. All good.
First off, big congratulations on your win. How does it feel now to sort of be sitting comfortably up in that upper bracket?
Pretty amazing, I would say. Feeling really, really good right now.
Are you feeling a little bit? Do you feel more nervous now that you only have a few matches left to win in order to make it that top 8, or do you feel a little bit relieved now that you've done so well on the first day?
I mean, it's the buy turn, right? So I guess I got some money one already.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Got your eyes on the prize, man. I like that.
I'm feeling even better right now.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about Shaman in general. So a lot of people thought the aggro Shaman was going to be sort of the #1 Shaman archetype coming into the standard format. But you sort of changed things up, and you've been playing around a lot with the mid-range Shaman and different variations of it. Do you think Shaman's here to stay? Do you think it's just going to be at the top for a long time? Give me your thoughts on that class in general.
So I was playing like a lot of Shaman since the beginning of the standards. I kind of hit like high legend with it, and I kind of disagree with aggro Shaman in the lineup. I think it's terrible. Like, I don't see the reason why would you ever bring this above a mid-range Shaman right now. But yeah, I guess it will stay for a long time, at least if we want to see new cards coming out soon.
Yeah, it feels like as long as Forbidden Healing is around, aggro Shaman's going to struggle, judging by that last game. But now you're in the next round of the upper bracket, along with one of your teammates, Crane333. So did you prepare with him at all, or who did you prepare with coming into the preliminary?
I didn't prepare that much because I was streaming a lot, and I was just like talking after the stream about the decks. I haven't had that much practice, to be honest. I was talking with my teammates from Complexity. I was talking a lot with Karen about the decks. Who else? I was talking with Gara, like a lot, and my Polish friends from Hearthstone. Like, oh goddamn it, he's like called Kacper. He has like a really weird nickname, A8 something. Plus I kill you. So yeah.
Yeah, well, it seemed to work out for you because both you guys are making it pretty far. So, once again, a big congratulations and good luck in the rest of the tournament and tomorrow.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much. All right.